Hello, friends. We're doing Bible study. And you know what? It's one that's going to be worth attending because Yoav is going to be there. We're going to see you guys in 5 minutes. I have just posted the link for the stream. Please come out, hang out with us. It would be great. We're going to talk about Hiram. We're going to talk about the temple. We might get into some weird directions. Hopefully, someone can set me straight on a couple of things. Either way, you got 5 minutes to grab your Bibles and meet us in 1 Kings chapter 5. See you then. Hello, everyone. Wow, we got a good group. Excellent. Joseph, are you staying for the whole time, or are you running out at some point?
I think I can just sit here. I mean, I don't know that I'm. Sit here. Jump in.
Okay. And Yoav is back. Yoav, it is good to see you in your regular basement. Are you in the basement? I always feel like you're in the basement. I don't know.
Well, thanks for the compliment. This is my bedroom.
Okay. Well, you got to put stuff on those walls, all right? Yeah, so, something that'll orient. And Mr. Sartori, always great to see you. Good to have you out. We're going to be talking about Hiram and the creation of the temple. We are not going to be talking about whether or not Solomon controlled demons to make worms cut stones. I think we're going to stay out of that territory because it is not in the biblical text. You guys are going to have to look into that yourselves. Wait, did you just? What was? Is it in the Bible? You just gave like a look, like you did this, like it's kind of in there.
I mean, the source for the Shamir is the Bible.
Sorry. Could you say that again? I had to mute Sartori because when you were talking, it gave a weird feedback thing.
The source for the concept of the Shamir, which is the name of the rock cutting warrior, whatever, is in the Bible. It's just not in this part of the Bible.
Where is the Shamir?
It comes up like 4 times. I think like once in Jeremiah, maybe Isaiah and Psalms. It comes up, but there it's not clear what it is, right? It is something that cuts. We know that. It's something that is sharp,
right,
that cuts. In one of the locations where it's used, it does sound like it's a living thing, but otherwise it does not. And the expansion and its use here is fascinating because everywhere else it has to do with like carving God's word on your heart and stuff like that. And it's like a scribal tool of some sort, maybe, or it's an architecture tool of some sort. Except the place where it's described, where it sounds like it might be alive, which is the whole weirdness. So like I would say it's not in this part of the Bible. It's fine. There are other places where it's used, and there are ways and reasons why it's connected to the building of the temple that serve as the foundation for those midrashim. But we don't need, obviously, you don't have to go down. But it is
and RJ is bringing up an important point. The importance of it is that it's not iron and yet it cuts. Because there's specific stones in the temple that it says you can't use iron tools to cut them. So where did they come from? This is a possible answer to that question that has everyone so curious. Even though I haven't started we just went on a huge rabbit trail of what I said we're not going to talk on. I love it.
I bet it was lasers.
That's true. It's true. I think so.
Solar-powered ones.
So Michael believes that the worm had lasers. Fine, sure. Whatever it was. Yeah. And we're gonna go ahead, Sartori.
Well, no, it's like, that's what they do always in the movies with like all the stuff in ancient Egypt. There's like like the sun hits some gemstone and it like creates a beam of energy that powers everything. Seems plausible, and sure, you could ascribe a lifelike quality to such a thing. I don't know. Lasers.
It's good. That's good. I like how there's certain things that are still magic to us, and lasers is one of those things. So like originally when they were trying to come up with how life originated, when they're just like, I don't know, lightning struck something, because just people didn't understand lightning, so it was just like magic. It's essentially the same thing. Okay, I'm already bogged down. I've upset Yoav. I'm so sorry. We brought you back.
Nothing about laser is one of the most well understood phenomena in physics.
Yeah, the Egyptians knew about it.
Yeah.
Yes,
okay.
The Egyptians did not know about it. True.
Oh.
Okay, we're going to the Bible. Let's go there. How about we do that? Cassandra has unfortunately gotten a job. It's not unfortunate that women are working. Whatever. Okay, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is she's unable to attend. So it's either going to be me or Michael who reads, because Yoav has already stated that he will not be on camera. And
Okay.
Yosef is in it now.
I'll only read in Hebrew. So.
We'll only read in Hebrew. Okay, excellent. Oh, that's, yeah, purist. So, Sartori, will you read for us? Would that be a thing which you do?
Sure. Now Hiram, king of Tyre, sent his servants to Solomon when he heard that they had anointed him king in place of his father, for Hiram always loved David. And Solomon sent word to Hiram, "You know that David my father could not build a house for the name of the Lord his God because of the warfare with which his enemies surrounded him, until the Lord put them under the soles of his feet. But now the Lord my God has given me rest on every side. There is neither adversary nor misfortune. And so I intend to build a house for the name of the Lord my God, as the Lord said to David my father, your son, whom I will set on your throne in your place, shall build the house for my name."
Okay, let's pause. Let's pause there and see if there's any comments that people want to make before I throw in my 2 cents.
Have you? I wasn't here for the past couple of Kings ones. You know that this is not where the chapter starts in the in the Masoretic text, right? Like the
Right,
Jewish.
right.
Okay, so this is 5:15.
Yeah.
But we read the rest of it last week or 2 weeks ago, right? We must have.
Yeah, that's right. Yep.
So a small note is this word always love David. So it can mean love. However, it's also important to know that it is also a technical term in ancient politics. We have it in the cardinal letters and stuff, right? Ohev, one who loves, but also it is the technical term for one who has a covenant-based alliance.
Mm-hmm.
So, and one owes love to one people who they covenant with, right? It's part of the obligations of the covenant, and it's how it's described. So that's really easy to gloss here.
Right. It's not merely. It's like when people use the term partner. It's an interesting kind of a term, because do they mean this in an affectionate term, or do they mean it as like as a business partner, right? That is, I do think that's interesting. There's something to note that I wanted to bring up, which was this is from 1 Kings 7. It says that it refers to Hiram as a widow of the tribe of Naphtali. Okay?
The son of a widow.
Yeah, the son of a widow of a tribe of Naphtali. So if you're just going by 5, he might seem entirely as a foreigner, but he may actually have, he's listed elsewhere as being the descendant of an Israelite, as a descendant of on his mother's side.
We could also note that archaeologically, in the areas just east of Tyre, there's 2 Aramaean kingdoms, both of which had kings in this period, or slightly after, maybe 100 years after or so, who have names using like Jewish divine names, or what we consider Jewish. I mean, there are other people worshiping God under like
El.
names like, not just El and not Canaanite names, but seemingly more specifically biblical Jewish names. So that's, some of their names are right out of the Bible. And there is now a contention that there were other, I don't like the term because it makes you pronounce it tetragrammaton, but I don't believe it's the proper pronunciation. There are other Yahwists, right? Other people who follow the God of the Jews. Maybe then they saw them as their own God, right? Not just the Jewish God. There were other Yahwist kingdoms in Aram in this period, certainly in the 9th century and 8th century.
Thank you.
Is it Is it better to say what do they call them, Jehovists or whatever? Like when they talk about the documentary
It's neither. I don't think
hypothesis?
neither is the correct pronunciation of the name.
Right,
I
but
think doing
if
it.
it's the wrong pronunciation, it's less
It-
offensive, right?
It's more wrong, so it's like more clearly that you don't mean to be saying it.
Fine. We could go Jehovian. Jehovian.
Yeah.
It may or may not be related to Israelites, but certainly seem to kind of be in the same boat as Hiram here. We should call him Hiram.
Yeah.
It's also interesting, Hiram's name, right? So if he's Jewish, right? So Hiram, and it also means speaking a Semitic language anyway. It's someone who's Hiram is something which is like set aside. Usually, like there's a modern, more like rabbinic parlance. It's something that someone who has a ban of excommunication on. But in biblical parlance, Hiram is something which has been set aside for God, often to be destroyed, but sometimes it's also like this is this belongs to the priests, right? So that came up in last week's parsha. Like something that's Hiram belongs to the priests.
Right.
He has this name, which kind of is, it's not specifically a Jewish name, but it is kind of this idea of holiness associated with his name.
Does anyone have any thoughts on how it is stated? My father could not build a house for the name of Hashem his God because of the warfare with which his enemies surrounded him, until Hashem put them under the soles of his feet.
I have a related comment. There is a phrase, there is neither adversary nor misfortune. And if I look at the Hebrew, en Satan ve'en pegara. Literally, there is no devil. There is
no Satan.
Because we've just killed him.
Killed you, Yoav.
My previous incarnation, but I came back.
Yes, yeah.
No, there's a lot to say here, right? Because one, we know we've had this discussion last time. David wasn't allowed to build the temple. He wanted to, and there is this phrase in Deuteronomy that he says you can't, like the place isn't going to be built or to rest that. It's literally the first phrase here in verse 19. That God has how do you have it in your text? Given me rest on every side. I don't know if I love that translation, but like that idea is linked to like only when that happens are you allowed to build a temple. But what this doesn't say is what it says in Chronicles, which is even when all the enemies were vanquished, David still wasn't allowed to because he had blood on his hands, right? So Solomon's skipping over that little bit, or this version skips over that little bit. And it's also weird that he's building it for the name, right? He's not building it for God. He's building it for the name of God.
I'm really glad you noticed that.
Because the theology of the name, we have it in all the Deuteronomistic texts, right? But the name is, right? It's kind of, God puts his name in things. He puts his name in the prophet to carry out his word, right? So the temple is a vehicle for God, in much the same way that in Exodus Moses is a vehicle for God. He's putting his name, Lasuma et Shmi Sham. Right? He's putting his name inside. He puts his name inside the tabernacle too, right? He uses that same language.
Yeah.
And one might see it as a way to distance, right? God is everywhere, but he can put his name into certain things. It's a way to focus or concentrate the divine presence or the divine ability to connect to God becomes stronger in certain places or through certain people.
Right. So much so, I just did it. Is instead of saying the Tetragrammaton, I said Hashem, and Hashem is the name, right? It's a way of speaking of God.
So there's that, but Shem. So there's some interesting stuff about how the kavod, so we call it Shekhinah in modern kind of.
Yeah.
In biblical Hebrew, it's the kavod, but the kavod and the shem, the glory of God, and the name of God are often interchanged in some of these texts. It is this kind of like, I wouldn't say physical manifestation of his presence, but it's a spiritual manifestation of his presence in a concentrated form, right?
Well, I wanted to draw attention to this because in the commandment, it actually says you will not bear the name of God in vain. Right? It is this idea that his name is going to rest somewhere or bearing the name, which could refer to speaking, but also has a sense of the people who have his name on them, right? God puts his name, like on the priest, they're literally, he bears the name, right? On his forehead, there's the letters, and also he bears the name of his people. Like that word for bearing is...
So there's a little different. I'll say that. The priest does not bear the name. He's never described, sorry, I should say this. He's never described as having the name inside him and bearing the name in that sense. He wears the name, but he bears the sin of the people, and we have to remember that the one who bears the name cannot bear the sin of the people. That's an Exodus, right? So there actually has to be two different roles. One that has the name internally, and that brings God down, and one who bears the sin of the people and that brings the people up to God, right? So has to be kind of two different motions here.
None of the Christians watching know what point you're trying to make in that.
Yeah, I'm sure they have no idea what I'm saying.
So for God to come down, it's got to be inside a person, like an incarnation kind of a thing. Was that what you mean?
It's used for every prophet, so it's not just one incarnation, right?
Oh, something just happened to your mic, Joseph. Oh, it sounds, it's like you're in a tin can.
Hello.
Oh, now you sound good.
Okay, just bring it closer to my face. This bearing the name, put the name inside a prophet is used for multiple prophets. It's not just one, right? So unless you're going to start saying Moses is an incarnation and Isaiah is an incarnation and they're all incarnations, right? Then I don't know if we could use that term. It's also not an incarnation because it's not like the name. The name is the name is not the logos, so that's an important difference, right?
That'd be like Devar.
Right, it's not that. And the name is also not God's essence, right? It's not that God is putting his nature inside someone else in the way that a Diophysite, like Trinitarian, would understand this. So I'd be very careful with the word incarnation here. Incarnation has a foundation in Jewish things, of course, but like this is a different, earlier version of what that eventually evolves into.
Right.
Or so it sounds. I guess it really sounds more like being filled with the Spirit in some sense. Is it like that, or is it? I mean, but it's a name, so I don't know how. So it is.
Well,
different in some sense.
The word name, it's not a name in name in Hebrew often means like the names are very fluid in Hebrew. It's not like you have some secret sacred name and that's like it, and it's if someone knows your name, like they have control over you type of Western stuff, right? Like naming in Hebrew is talking about functional relationships. So different names happen for different people depending on the relationship they have with something, right? So God putting his name in something is sort of like his relationship like fundamentally changes in a sense. That's what it's saying, right? My relationship with you, I don't know how to put it in English or even in Hebrew. I was trying to think about the words here. I think the word naming here is misleading us though, because we have very situations of what names are.
Well, that's an interesting thing. Well, because obviously, like Luke with his little white stone name there, where it says that in Revelation, and there is a debate as to whose name it is. Like, is it the name of the person or is it a unique name of God? But essentially, it being unique to one person and shared by God, it is really a name of a relationship. So, like, either way you want to put it, it's like it is tied to the relational aspect of it because it's unique to the person and God.
Yeah, so I've gone back and forth on that with Luke many times.
Yeah,
it's a big one for us. I think it's the name on someone's gravestone. I think it's, from, we know that their graves are white. That's also in the Testament. They also have the Levitical ritual. I think it's the name. The name that you finally develop, kind of at the point where you die. Your holistic name that captures your life. And that might be, right, it's not just like the name at the top of the gravestone, it's all those adjectives that we put in English on modern American gravestones, right? Loving father and like all those things. I think that's the Whitestone name, I think. But that's a very different reading.
Well, okay, I want to do a whole thing on the temple at some point, where maybe we just talk about the architecture. I'd love to talk to you more about that and how all that stuff relates and how the bearing of the name might relate to that, because there's a couple of things that are going off in my head, but I don't want to be brought off course. I want to go back to the text in which we're talking about. And part of the importance that I want to just bring attention to in the name, that build a house for the name of Hashem, his God, this is a fulfillment of something which is stated in Deuteronomy, that God will choose the place for where his name will dwell. So there's something about his name dwelling there. Please, people watching this, look up other uses of the name, right? So Moses, for instance, when he appeals to God not to destroy the people, appeals to the name, specifically the name of Hashem. So how that works, please look into this deeper. But either way, Hiram, it is from Tyre. So I think this place for the house for God, for the name, is a reference to Deuteronomy. And even though we know that Hiram is, he's got a Jewish mom, he's still presented as the king of Tyre. And I think that is presenting this as also a fulfillment of them being firmly established, in that there's an idea that the kings, plural, will visit from other lands to admire what Israel is doing and their God and the Torah and all those things. So that someone from afar is coming and helping with this, I think is establishing some sort of a fulfillment of those.
I'm not sure because if he's Jewish, then I don't know that it really fulfills that in the same way that it seems to be intended.
Right. Okay, I accept that. I accept it. All right, let's move on. Sartori, will you read for me again?
Now, therefore, command that cedars of Lebanon be cut for me, and my servants will join your servants, and I will pay you for your servants such wages as you set. For you know that there is no one among us who knows how to cut timber like the Sidonians. As soon as Hiram heard the words of Solomon, he rejoiced greatly and said, Blessed be the Lord this day, who has given to David a wise son to be over this great people. And Hiram sent to Solomon, saying, I have heard the message that you have sent to me. I am ready to do all you desire in the matter of cedar and cypress timber. My servants shall bring it down to the sea from Lebanon, and I will make it into rafts to go by sea to the place you direct. And I will have them broken up there, and you shall receive it. And you shall meet my wishes by providing food for my household.
Okay, let's pause 1 second. I just want to make a mention because in one stream, I somehow got a group of y'all to read the Epic of Gilgamesh. And so I would be remiss not to mention that there's a whole set of adventures where the cedars of Lebanon were known worldwide as sacred trees, and that they were important and considered the best in the world. So there's a whole adventure in the Epic of Gilgamesh revolving around a monster named Humbaba. And the defeat of Humbaba, the guardian of the cedar forest, is for them to have access to these trees because they're worldwide known. So this relationship of bringing these, it's essentially a way of speaking of the best that the world has access to as far as timber goes is going to be brought forward. So that's Cedars of Lebanon. Still on the flag. Go ahead.
So yeah, the church that my wife and I got married in, we got married in like their old building, but at the time they were building a new one, and they had paid a bunch of money to have cedar beams from Lebanon shipped in there so that they could have that be a part of their new sanctuary, like and like the big structural cross beams of the thing. So yeah, it's pretty cool. I mean, I don't know. I'm sure a lot of people would be like, that's weird, like, because they're being too biblicistic or whatever, but I thought it was pretty cool.
There's, I'll show it to people another time. It's in my creation image. I had to pick certain trees that made it into my creation image and ones that didn't, and I made sure that the cedar tree, a Lebanese cedar tree, made its way in.
Comment about the names. I mean, it has been said in the comment. The name of the city in Hebrew is Tzor, which is exactly like the same word as a type of tough rock. And it seems to be an ancient word common to many Afro-Asiatic languages. So we're coming again to the issue of tough stones used for cutting. And strangely, the name of the place changes because it started at Tzor and now he's talking about the Sidonians. And what I know, there were two cities next to each other, Tzor and Sidon. So although he's the king of Tzor, the kingdom must be extended to the other city of Sidon as well.
Right. Normally, they're independent city-states. There aren't a lot of periods where one controls the other. So it's very odd, actually.
Yeah, the time when they are under one kingdom is exactly the high time of the Phoenicians, when the Phoenicians were working as one nation. And
stuff.
people also commented that around that time the Phoenicians will travel and found Carthago, which Carthago means Keret Hadasha, which means a new city.
Mm-hmm.
So around the time the Phoenicians were traveling around and founding colonies, strangely enough, by the time Carthago was conquered by the Romans, it was no longer Phoenicians. It was populated by Greeks mainly.
I do think it's interesting, going back a little bit to where it was like David couldn't build the house because the war, he was surrounded by war. And, I think there's something of that, like maybe you could, I just wanted to mention it before, like that, that God's priorities are like, first peace first and then worship. It's not like worship as a technology of warfare or something, but then also by having this peace, you get this communal, this commerce relationship. So you get to have the best of materials and trades that wouldn't be available if you were being extremely nationalistic about your worship or your temple. So
yeah, it's a correct angle, but I will add to it. Of course, you worship in Tafabo, but in a temporary place, locally. You have local worship. The point of a temple is for all nations to flock to the temple from all around the globe. This is why you build a temple, and for that you need peacetime.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a good point. It's for pilgrimage.
There's also this interesting thing. So if you think about Epic of Gilgamesh, or also Egypt has another two tales that may or may not be related, but also to do with the cedars of Lebanon and getting them specifically. It's where the gods live, right? It's the
Yep.
abode of the gods is the cedars of Lebanon. I mean, also Mount Sophon is where Baal is, right?
Yeah,
But, like,
yeah.
so there is something
Mount
interesting
Hermon.
here.
Mount Hermon
Yes,
is also
Hermon,
gets tied
yes.
with all this stuff. Yeah.
Right. So Hermon's also part of this, but like, there is something interesting here, right? Because there's no, on the one hand, there's no acknowledgement of that in the text, right? There's no like,
Yeah.
we're creating our own kind of false forest of Lebanon, not false, but like synthetic one that kind of transports God's dwelling from there to here. And what's interesting, of course, is in his palace, he does have a room called the Forest of Lebanon, but not in the temple. Right? And the temple itself is not allowed to have planted trees and all these things because of the Asherah worship and all those issues. At the same time, as they're rejecting this, they want the cedars for the temple because, I mean, one, they're really good wood. I mean, we could just leave it at the materialistic explanation. But like, there does seem to be something here where it's like purposefully not making that connection that everyone kind of knows, I think, in the back of their head.
Yeah, it's known worldwide, right? Like,
right.
It's a pretty big deal, and it's especially with the connection with Baal. It may even be seen as showing God's supremacy, partially, because like there's an idea that the guardians of the forest had to be defeated or given permission in order for those woods to be taken.
Right. So let's think about how this compares then to Genesis 1, right? So the same way that undermines like that kind of polytheistic gods at war, you have to battle them adventure world. That's very chaotic versus like a very ordered, like, hey, I don't have to do any of that. God is in control of everything. All I have to do is ask my friend and he gives me the wood, right? Like, it's a lot more like, it's not huge mythical battles against gods. It's just like there's no Tiamat in Genesis 1.
Yeah. That's interesting. Anything else about these cedars of Lebanon and how awesome they are?
There's a great mini documentary on YouTube about how awesome they are, by the way, that we could put a link to. They're very cool.
Awesome. Joseph, I will put you in charge of that because I don't know. I haven't seen it, but I will watch it as soon as you connect it to this video.
Okay, I'll do my best.
All right, Sartori, your literacy is required again.
Okay. So Hiram supplied Solomon with all the timber of cedar and cypress that he desired, while Solomon gave Hiram 20,000 cores of wheat as food for his household and 20,000 cores of beaten oil. Solomon gave this to Hiram year by year. And the Lord gave Solomon wisdom as he promised him. And there was peace between Hiram and Solomon, and the two of them made a treaty. King Solomon drafted forced labor out of all Israel, and the draft numbered 30,000 men. And he sent them to Lebanon, 10,000 a month in shifts. They would be a month in Lebanon and 2 months at home. Adoniram was in charge of the draft. Solomon also had 70,000 burden bearers and 80,000 stonecutters in the hill country, besides Solomon's 3,300 chief officers who were over the work, who had charge of the people who carried on the work. At the king's command, they quarried out great, costly stones in order to lay the foundation of the house with dressed stones. So Solomon's builders and Hiram's builders and the men of Gebal did the cutting and prepared the timber and the stone to build the house.
Wonderful. Thank you. How are we feeling about these drafted forced laborers? Is that supposed to be, are we supposed to feel negative about that, or is that just impressive?
I don't think so. I mean, I think because it says it here, whatever, or somewhere else that, they're gaining the skill because they don't have knowledge of wood, lumber and woodworking and all that. And they're gaining it. And, 1 month away, 2 months back, they're enriching the country, So, I mean, historically, most people are excited about work that has the promise of
I honestly
pay and food.
Sartori, I'm so glad you're here because I never thought of it from the perspective of a laborer who is getting to to be an apprentice to like
Yeah,
the
yeah.
best woodworkers in the world. You're
Yeah.
you're thinking of it entirely as a construction worker, as a way of working your way up. That's great.
Well, it's funny because people are always like, oh, Joseph, Jesus's father, Joseph, like he must have been not a carpenter, it must have been masonry. And I'm like, no, there's like this whole process where Israelites learned how to work with wood. I mean, he could have done both. It is a general term, the Greek term tecton, but it doesn't exclude the use of wood. And the other thing is that wood doesn't last archaeologically, so it's impossible to know like how much wooden structures there were. Because that's why all those Greek temples don't have roofs, because they were made of wood.
Right.
There's too much wheat around. How do you build the pyramids in Egypt? Egypt is a wheat basket, and there is enough food for everybody. There are certain months in the year when you have to sow on, you have to gather the wheat. Lots of months in the year you just sit and wait. And there's food for anybody. This is either you put the people to work building pyramids, or they become idle and restless, as Dostoevsky would have commented. So I see a situation here that is resembling the economical situation in Egypt. Somehow there's a huge source of food, a huge source of wheat, enough to be sent to Lebanon and to feed all the Israeli workers. And they don't have to work all year. They have to work 2 months in one season, 2 months in another season. They are actually idle most of the year. This is not the usual climate in Israel. Prior to the Industrial Revolution, before 1925, you had to basically work all year around just to keep yourself alive, because it's the Middle East. Rain is not plentiful. The soil is not as fertile as it is in France. Somehow, the climate allows for unusual amount of wheat to be gathered, and I have a feeling it's not in the land of Israel as such, but more in the valleys of the large rivers in Syria. I think the coalition here is definitely including the Aramites as the suppliers of wheat for everybody.
Interesting. Oh, you're on mute, Yosef. Oh, you're still somehow on mute.
Seriously? Hello.
Oh, now I hear you good. Yeah.
Okay. Potentially, but there's also like he's clearly managing some international trade here too, right? And there are other products that they could be trading for wheat. So I hear you. It's possible that they have land. He does have these villages that David has in southern Syria that he's going to give back at some point, right? There's a whole thing over those, but at the same time, like he's on the spice trade routes. They have olive oil, they have wine, they're doing some glass work, it sounds like. So there are other things that they could be trading for significant amounts of wheat. It's not, I don't know, I wouldn't necessarily jump to it's homegrown per se.
Awesome. Just to be clear, my point was that it was not homegrown. That was exactly my point.
Right. It did, yeah. Yosef, do you have any thoughts on the forced labor point that I was, or just drafted forced labor? Are we supposed to feel bad about this?
I kept losing the connection a little bit, but I mean, yeah, these are, he is being described as an Egyptian pharaoh here. I mean, there's very clear, the text is very clearly painting him like pharaoh.
Okay.
And that is meant to disturb us, I think.
Yeah. I wanted to make sure that it wasn't just me picking this up.
Not just you.
That when he's forced labor and he's married to the daughter of Pharaoh, a man has questions. We can see the roots of some of this stuff. I want to go back to a comment that someone made because I need to at some point mention this. Someone said Sartori always uses Freemasonic tropes, but this person has labeled themselves as Hiram, and I don't know if this is intentional. I made mention of this in the description of this video that Hiram is a major figure in Freemasonic thought, something related to the third level. Every now and then I do the research on Freemasonry, and I can't keep all the stories straight. I am not a Freemason. It seems it seems to me that it crosses a bunch of lines. I'm just going to say that. No offense intended. If there's like a righteous Freemason watching, but it seems like it crosses a bunch of lines to me. But Hiram becomes a significant figure within Freemasonic thought because they say that this is why they're Freemasons, is that they come from the Freemasons of Solomon who built the temple. So they take a bunch of temple imagery, they take a bunch of stories from this section, and they kind of they make a lot out of it.
We're drafted labor Freemasons. Isn't that the opposite of free? They're unfreemasons.
Thank you, Joseph. That's very good. That's very good.
So one of the other parallels, I know you were focusing on Mas, but and I don't know what verse this is in because of the mismatch, but my version, verse 30, where he has officials, he has 3,300 officials over the people. So there, it specifically uses this word rodim, right? So which is to subjugate or have dominion. We all actually know it from Genesis as this famous word of you shall have dominion over or do the fish of the
over
sea,
the animals.
But this is not a word that you want to see. Like this is a word that is associated with Egypt and taskmasters and putting people over other people, right? So this is one of those other clues. On the other hand, it's really weird because the word for the labor, it's not just lavod, not just like work. It's not the word for slavery here, right? The word here is that they're there to do melacha. Melacha is what's not allowed on Shabbat, and is the word for the type of work that God does in Genesis, creating the world, right? And there's also the name for the work of creating the tabernacle. So you kind of have two themes here going on, where you have kind of they are doing the creative labor that is temple, tabernacle, world building, but they're doing it in an Egyptian kind of problematic way, right? So they have kind of both themes at the same time.
Thank you for that. Yeah, it's I feel like repeatedly Solomon is spoken of in this like back and forth sort of way. Every single chapter that's good leaves this little black sort of mark for you to think about, and all the black sort of chapters have these little highlights where you're like, oh, maybe he's actually a good character. Like he's complex. Like how do you play him as I always think of film, right? Because oftentimes in film you make it very clear what side people are on.
I mean, well, I think this is the complex thing about a character is associated with wisdom, is that like the more you increase with wisdom, the more things you can do that another person can't do, like and be endangered in the same way. And I think and obviously Solomon ends up in a with a tarnished reputation. My theory personally is that this is intentional to dissuade people from like trying to repeat this sort of pharaonic imagery. Like he's going to do it the best ever, and then nobody can stack up against him, but also he's a failure. So it's kind of like putting the final nail in the coffin of like, if you think this is the right way to build a utopia or something, but I mean, because the whole thing is with like Pharaoh, it's like, well, Pharaoh was a tyrant, but he inherited the system that Joseph built, and if Joseph hadn't done it, the people would have starved. So it's like, it's very tempting to just always say that like the system is good or bad, but it really is a lot more. Who is running the system is very a big factor in it.
There's that. I think there is an implicit critique even of Joseph when Joseph sets up the system. I don't think it's just because like Pharaoh runs it poorly and he runs it well. There are ways to read it where it's the 7 years of famine have parallels, and the way he runs it is kind of like an anti-sabbatical year, and kind of everything about how he deals with it is kind of the reason why the sabbatical year has to be set up to prevent that type of government again.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, it is obviously it is problematic, and like that's the, manipulation of crisis is like the way that, like, all the dictators look at that kind of story and they're like, if we could know about a crisis ahead of time, we could really benefit. I know, we'll just start the crisis, and then like that's really bad. But so it's like, the point,
Well, and it did one of the things I'd like to say.
How do you get? I mean, it is kind of like this thing of like, I don't know, like civilization as being like little children or whatever. Like, it would be best if the people had the wisdom and foresight to manage their own, like, because if any of them had used their own 7 years of great wealth to stockpile for themselves, they wouldn't have needed to come to Joseph for the food, but he kept that foresight to himself, but having done that, none of them, we have to assume they all, when they had excess, they just blew it on stuff. They sold their grain.
It's not, that's not what's described in Genesis. In Genesis, his idea is implemented for everybody, right? So it's not, you don't have a choice. Even if you have extra, it goes to Pharaoh's storehouses. Everyone brought their things to those storehouses. It wasn't that it was being blown. It wasn't that it was being wasted.
Well,
it wasn't that he didn't share his idea.
No, he wasn't taking it. He wasn't.
He didn't go on a world tour.
Well, the people had the wealth and all these things that they ended up trading in for. Like, they had their private property that they, after, when the 7 years of famine started, everybody started coming to him. And first they use their money, then they trade their livestock, then they trade their land, and so they had private property, but none of them individually were prepared to weather 7 years of famine.
Well, they weren't allowed to. They had to bring their stuff. That was the rule. They weren't allowed to keep that stuff, and he paid them for their wheat, right? So like, it's not like, so they changed what fungible goods they had, right? And they were going to exchange them. He has the system to preserve and distribute the most fairly. In theory, that's the idea, right? They weren't allowed to keep their excess grain. It wasn't an issue. I don't see where it's like you're saying, oh, they should have done this on their own. They shouldn't have.
No, I'm not saying that. Well, I'm not saying they should have. Well, let's face it. He didn't trust them to do it on their own, because he didn't say, guys, this is what's going to happen. He just managed them that way. I mean,
I think everyone knew what was going to happen because they had to tell the entire people to convince them into the scheme. I don't think it was just like, we're going to seize your grain. Sorry, guys, we're not going to tell you what. We're just going to put it here. We're not going to tell you what's going on. The king's just evil, whatever, or whatever. We're just going to be silent about it. Like, no, they told people to prepare, and this was the preparation. Was, we're going to have a centralized distribution system, and you're going to come into the cities, right? So he moves them around their land. He takes them off their land. There's a whole thing here going on, right? But and it's a problematic.
I must push back against Yon God. Yon God just said that the Lebanese were paying for it all, which is exactly opposite of what the text says.
Yeah, the text says that.
So, Solomon was paying for it all. The question is, where did Solomon got the money to pay everybody? First of all, we're talking about people being employed. Solomon is feeding everybody. Solomon is paying for everybody. So it is not, they are drafted, but it is, he's providing jobs for the people, which is what government should do. The question is, where is the source of wealth for Israel? And traditionally, what Israel is bringing to the table is olive oil. There were historical times like in the time of Jesus. Well, climate was favorable, and Israel was a huge source of olive oil for all of the Levant. And yes, people are mentioning copper for the copper mines, and just trade with the South, just being at the junction of trade. So everybody gains.
Okay, so I found, so in Genesis 41:34, Joseph's telling the plan, and he says, "Let Pharaoh appoint commissioners over the land to take a fifth of the harvest of Egypt during the 7 years of abundance." So they had a high tax, but that doesn't mean they still had 80% of whatever they grew to use at their discretion.
Why do you think they were producing so much surplus, though? This was a subsistence society, right? The subsistence culture is not, particularly rich.
I mean,
what?
Well, but it was years of abundance. I mean, I guess it's relative.
In Egypt there is abundance.
The abundance is, but
in Egypt now you have
because then they have money. They have money to buy it when it first runs out. So whatever they've done, they've converted. They're not subsistence farmers because they have money on hand when the first year of the famine strikes or whatever. And that's what runs out first.
I wouldn't say
Egypt alone can feed 50 million people.
In what context? Today?
Today, but I mean, it's not because of modern machinery. It's because of the Nile.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean, but either way, so it was a proportional tax. So then after the first year of abundance, it's up, the people were like, hey, we gave the 20% we were supposed to, and we still have more left over. Then, maybe some of the people are like, oh, we don't have to plan as much next year. We don't know, but that's so, it wasn't like there was a cap on how much grain a person could own. It was a percentage taken. So
I think so no, I think these are interesting ideas to try to figure out, but there is, I believe, within the text, both here and in the Joseph story and in the story of Solomon, there is an idea that there's like a seed of a corruption that's going to cause a problem later, right? The verse
is about bettering the intellect of stone.
I'm sorry, it's happening again, Yosef. I don't like that I'm the one to tell you. It goes back and forth.
So the verses where it says they get these huge stones that to lay the foundations of the house, are specifically described as hewn stones, Yavnei Gazit, which is exactly where you're not allowed to build the altar out of, right? That's the language from Exodus. And we know elsewhere in this story, they're going to say, well, we didn't use, the sound of the hammer wasn't heard anywhere, in the temple. But that's because, so they're doing that kind of, they're still doing the thing they're not supposed to do, but they're doing it outside of the temple, right? They're doing it for the foundation stones, and they're doing it kind of before everything, like before it all comes together, and they're sort of getting away with it. And then there's also this other word, Solomon's masons are shaping the stones, which is yifsalu. Now yifsalu does mean to shape stones, but anyone reading this in Hebrew will immediately think, well, that's the word also for pesel, right? It's an idol, and there's like little hints here about something isn't being prepared quite right in the foundations of the temple itself. With these multiple clues, it's not just like AC. I would say like there's a lot of hints. There's a lot of things kind of, and that's what's going to happen, right? Because this is the middle of the Solomon story, and after this chapter, things are going to start going downhill, right? So this is both the high point and like kind of the tipping point where you start seeing like a lot of things are accumulating that are problematic. So more than just like the seeds of the earlier chapters. Now I would say we get really worried.
Right. It's interesting though, because it's just little chips almost, where when you're reading it, you just go, wait a second, that doesn't seem good, does it?
Yeah.
People are always messing up because people. Thank you, Don. Yes. I want everyone to know when I realized to stop paying attention to Hiram. The moment I stopped paying attention to what he was saying is when he said this: Freemasonry is Europeans practicing Moorish Kabbalah. That's when I, because early on I was like, what kind of a troll is this? Is it like a Yon God troll where they're making points that that I really need to think about, or should I not? That's the moment where I stopped taking them as seriously.
I just want to say to him that I'm very fluent in the history of Israel and Zionism in the Second World War. He should not try to teach me this part of the history. He's not breaking true news to me.
Yeah.
It's funny because it's clear that he's never watched Jacob's channel before, because Jacob's talked about all these things.
Well, I would just point out that even with that whole thing, with conspiracies, and it kind of goes along with the whole thing of this chapter, and I don't know, it's tough, like because you'll have people that'll bring up these things, and like the things we're mentioning about like how the stones are cut and stuff like that, and I guess this is like the problem, with making fences around, like if the law says a thing, you cannot err by trying to extend it beyond like what it commands, and then because then what happens is that you get this backlash of just negative associations, like the people that go all with the conspiracies about this Masonic stuff. They just like see like these things, and they'll be like, because there's an association, the thing itself is evil, and it's like, well, no, it's not good when people like make this stuff into a weird secret cult, but it doesn't mean that all the like there's nothing wrong with cutting stones to build buildings or whatever if it's not the temple of God or whatever. But it's just a weird, I don't know, the weird way that people get with that stuff. So, but I mean, it's worth studying closely when it's in regard to scripture, I guess. So
that bugs me. The whole question of cutting stone in the ancient time bugs me, because it is if people at that time already knew that cutting stones with iron and any tools is the wrong way around, and there is a better way. I wish they told me more about the better way.
Oh well, there's a guy he's got a pretty good case for how they made the pyramids and stuff like that. That a lot of these ancient monoliths, they actually were melting the rock with molten salt, natron or other salts, and then constituting it with like mixed with like wood ash and things, and that so a lot of these like monoliths are actually a geopolymer, which he's got pretty good evidence for why it makes sense that they're a lot of them might be cast and not carved or cut.
I don't buy it.
I only accept.
Yoav wants to really talk about the shamir. Clearly, he wants to know about the other techniques that use worms to cut stone.
Well, you can put molten salt on a granite slab, and it dissolves all the quartz that binds it together. I mean, the guy's tested it too, so
So why
like
don't? So why? So why?
in his backyard.
Why are we not building buildings with the techniques nowadays?
Oh, we are.
Are we so stupid?
We are. Geopolymers is a growing industry because, well, they actually use what they use now is they use a lot of the material that's left over from the oil refining process. It's got like a lot of these trace like metals in it that essentially it's a chemically hardening stone product, it actually expels water. So unlike concrete, which traps water in it, this will actually it all comes out, and it produces a very hard, durable stone. So
Now, what bugs me, why do I have to guess? I mean, we're going to get into in this chapter very fine details of how you build a temple. I wish they devoted sort of 3 or 4 chapters to the basic art of cutting stones. Bugs me.
Oh, I think Yosef is frozen. Is he
I just assume it's because God loves autistic people too. So
Oh, well, there's another possibility which we haven't spoken of, which is that some of these things are meant to be secret. That like maybe there's some things that we're not supposed to know, and God is concerned that Yoav would try to make his own temple if all of the instructions were there. Right? Not allowed. Okay, you're only allowed one. Okay, you sir are no Bezalel.
Bezalel.
Oh, sorry.
I was just also thinking the numbers here are interesting because at the end of Samuel we had these massive numbers, right, of 800,000 and 500,000, and we didn't even count Levi and Benjamin in that, which is so we probably have 1.6 million people or so, let's say, around that. And the numbers here would be about 10%, right, of the numbers of the draftable men, let's say, at the end of Samuel. So there seems to be something there where this is a burden, but it is, I mean, I don't know if it's exactly 10%, and it doesn't say that. We don't have to necessarily go into that symbolism, but this is a large mobilization, but it is not the total war mobilization numbers that we got from the David census kind of sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's you got to take it in that perspective of this is vastly preferable to being conscripted into the army, to be conscripted into a job training thing,
Yosef, can I ask a personal question?
Sure.
Are you on the side of the Shamir as the explanation?
How do I put this? Insofar as I take any midrash, right? So Shamir, I do not, I think there's a lot to be learned from the midrashim of the Shamir. They actually have quite a lot of spiritual depth and kind of, but also entertainment. At the same time, I wouldn't say it as a literal explanation, right?
Okay. Well, and it is interesting because unless I'm mistaken, within that midrash, there's the idea that in Solomon having command over the Shamir, it's through meddling with these spirits that in some of those traditions isn't Solomon influenced by them, that they would see this as they're trying to explain for a turning point within the text where things get much worse for Solomon after this.
Yes and no, right? Because there's this weird thing where he loses the throne in one of in this, but that's not. That can't be the second half of this story unless you're trying to use that to say, well, this is the second half isn't actually Solomon. It's this demon impersonating Solomon, which is to me just Deus Ex Machina type explanation. That's very it misses the whole point.
But that is a perspective that some people have, is it not?
I'm trying to remember where the source is. We've had this discussion before on the server, so I think because there's Muslim sources and there's Jewish sources on this. I never remember which one comes which, and a lot of them are quite late. So it is there. It is a perspective. I don't remember how particularly accepted as a mainstream Jewish perspective it is, but it does exist.
Okay, next question that I have, because we talked about it last week, and I want to kind of draw things to a close. But do you think that Solomon had the ability to speak with ants? Because that is a belief that Muslims have, and we were talking about that the knowing about nature is sometimes seen as actually his ability to like communicate with animals.
Yeah, somewhere it talks of, right? That is a thing, and that's in a previous chapter, right?
Right. Yeah.
That he can speak the language of the trees or something. I'd have to go back, but yeah, I mean, there's a lot of midrashim. I mean, so there's the midrash. It's a modern one. It's found in the ancient sources, where he talks to a bee, in the part of the Queen of Sheba story. The reason he's able to even communicate with the demons is based on that same verse. I think that he knows the language of all things. Gosh, I'd have to go back to see. What's that, in 3 or 2? Yeah, I mean that's
I think
certainly
it's 4, but I'm not sure.
Oh, it's in 4. Okay. But yeah, I mean that idea definitely exists in the Midrashim, that he has this ability. I don't know. So I don't know a specific story about Solomon and ants, but it doesn't surprise me if he, is taken to speak the language of all living creatures.
The ants are a mighty people.
That's true.
That's the beginning of a proverb, is it not? Okay. Well,
here, yeah. And it's specifically interesting, right? He can speak about, like, he can speak to or about these cedars of Lebanon. That's the first example in that
right.
verse, right? So he's able, and as well as the hyssop. Right.
Yeah. The biggest tree to the little thing that's growing out of the wall, right? It's biggest and smallest. Yeah, and that was a distinction that I was trying to make to everyone last week, is that in English it just says it just says about, but it could be bout or to.
Right.
Right? Did he speak to the trees or about them? Did he yeah. Anyway, this was a lot of fun. I have to get back to work because I came back from holidays this week, so I got some stuff I have to catch up on. So I got to be going. Thank you everyone for coming out. Happy 4th of July to Michael and Yosef, and to all the other Americans who are out there. I don't know who's American. Even to Yanni, though he is an expat. And to Don as well. Happy 4th of July. My Canada Day was fine. we don't care about it as much over here. It's a little bit, but yeah, I won't go into any further details about that. But thanks everyone for. Or does anyone have any closing things that they want to say before we close the stream about any of the subjects we covered?
Nah.
Hiram, I don't know who you are. I don't know what country you live in. If I knew more about you, I could give you more blessings, but I don't know you, so I'm keeping my blessings to myself in case I'm accidentally making a mistake by blessing you, okay? But I can bless Yosef and Michael. I hope you guys have a great time. You're both mensches in your own right, okay? Goodbye. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
He just left. So I was just gonna say, Yoav, right before this, if you didn't have the chapter break in the KJV or the Christian version, and you had the first 14 verses in this chapter, like we do in ours, like it makes much more sense in some sense, because at the end of what you have as chapter 4 for us is the beginning of chapter 5 is like how he gets the provisions, right? It says like kings from all over the earth and all these prefects, send him all of this food and for all these things, right? And then he's going to take that food and he's going to give it to build the temple, right? At the same time, the whole reason that Hiram sends somebody to him is because all the kings are sending people to him, right? That's the last verse right before the section started. So like there's a whole bunch of continuity there that I think the chapter break loses, and could have like helped inform the discussion a little bit more. And not just because I hadn't read the chapter last week, I was behind and not thinking about like, oh yeah, it's right here. So now it is also interesting though, because when he speaks to the trees, like the cedar and the hyssop, like you immediately think, well, those are used together ceremonially in a couple of rituals. And he's kind of like,
Yeah.
he could be talking to them, but he also could be talking about the laws about them, right? Because the whole vision of Deuteronomy, that the nations of the earth will come to you and say, wow, this nation has such wise laws. And here he is, literally, the references in that verse are all things that have to do with Jewish law. Like, it could just be he's expounding on the law and people, are impressed. But I understand the temptation to go into the cool, fantastical world where he talks to creatures.
Right. Yeah.
That's much more fun.
It's so much fun. It's so much fun. Okay, we're calling it there.
Okay.
Thank you, Joseph, for actually attending. Michael, thank you as always. And your literacy is much appreciated now that Cassandra has a job. Okay, goodbye, everyone.
Yeah.